There are comebacks in sport. And then there are returns. A comeback is something you fight your way back to. Something you claw toward through rehabilitation and doubt and the long, grinding process of convincing your body to do again what it once did naturally. Comebacks are stories of recovery. Of resilience. Of the refusal to accept an ending that arrived too early. A return is something different. A return is when someone who was never truly gone, who was simply waiting, preparing, building towards something in the silence while the world held its breath, finally steps back onto the field and reminds everyone exactly why they were waiting in the first place. What Shohei Ohtani did in his first spring training pitching appearance was not a comeback. It was a return. And when the final pitch of that scoreless outing crossed the plate, when the coaching staff turned to each other with expressions that mixed professional satisfaction with something closer to pure disbelief, the entire nation of Japan did not simply celebrate. It exhaled. Because what they had just witnessed was not merely a pitcher throwing well in a spring training game. What they had witnessed was confirmation of something the entire baseball world had been quietly, desperately hoping was true, that the version of Shohei Ohtani who takes the mound in 2025 is not a diminished version of what came before. He is something more. Today, we are going inside that appearance. Every pitch. Every adjustment. Every moment of the coaching staff's reaction. And what all of it tells us about what is coming for the rest of this season. To understand what that first spring training appearance meant, you first need to understand the weight of the silence that preceded it. The baseball world has spent considerable time in a state of carefully managed uncertainty about Ohtani the pitcher. The surgery. The recovery timeline. The question, never fully answered by anyone with complete authority, of when the mound version of him would return. Of whether the return would be gradual or sudden. Of whether what emerged on the other side of the rehabilitation process would look like the pitcher who had left, or like something adjusted and adapted and perhaps inevitably diminished. These questions were reasonable. They were not asked out of doubt about Ohtani's character or his commitment or his extraordinary capacity for preparation. They were asked because the body has its own timeline. Because even the most disciplined and meticulous approach to recovery cannot guarantee outcomes. Because the history of baseball is full of pitchers who came back from significant procedures and were never quite what they had been before. The baseball world was not pessimistic about Ohtani's return. But it was realistic. It understood that what was being asked of his body was significant. And it waited with the particular tension of people who care deeply about an outcome they cannot control. Spring training, in this context, was not simply the beginning of a new season. It was the answer to a question that had been sitting unanswered for longer than anyone was entirely comfortable with. And Ohtani walked to the mound and answered it in the most direct and unambiguous way available to him. With a scoreless outing. The word scoreless is simple. It is clean. It fits in a headline and translates easily across languages and requires no statistical literacy to understand. But for those who were watching that appearance with genuine knowledge of what they were evaluating, scoreless was almost beside the point. Because the question was never really whether Ohtani could prevent runs in a spring training game. The question was how he was doing it. What the mechanics looked like. Whether the arm was moving with the same freedom and the same conviction that it moved with before. Whether the pitches were coming out of his hand with the same qualities that made them so extraordinarily difficult to deal with when he was at his peak. And what those observers saw, what the coaching staff saw, what the analysts saw, what the experienced baseball eyes in that facility saw, went significantly beyond the box score result. The velocity was present. Not eased into carefully, not managed conservatively as if protecting something fragile. Present. Right there. Sitting at numbers that required no asterisk or qualification or comparison against a reduced standard. The movement was present. The pitches doing what they are supposed to do, arriving at the plate with the kind of late, decisive action that gives hitters a fraction of a second less than they need to make a good decision. But most significantly, and this is the detail that the coaching staff kept returning to in their conversations afterward, the adjustment was present. There is a version of a pitcher's return from a significant layoff that looks physically complete but feels mechanically rigid. Where the arm works and the velocity is there, but something in the sequencing, in the in-game thinking, in the real-time reading and responding that separates great pitchers from truly special ones, has not quite come back online yet. It is understandable when this happens. The body and the mind reconnect on different timelines. Physical recovery can outpace competitive sharpness. A pitcher can look fine on the radar gun and still be operating at a remove from the full version of what they are capable of. What Ohtani showed in that spring training appearance was that this gap, if it had ever existed for him during the recovery process, had been completely closed. When the first hitter he faced began to show recognition of his primary pitch, Ohtani did not persist. Did not rely on velocity or conviction to overcome the adjustment his opponent was making. He read what was happening, processed it in real time, and changed what he was doing with a speed and a certainty that the coaching staff described afterward as genuinely remarkable. Not just for a pitcher returning from a significant layoff. For any pitcher. At any point in a season. The ability to adjust mid-outing, to recognize what is working, identify what is being read, and shift the approach without losing command or confidence or the forward momentum that keeps hitters off balance, is one of the most sophisticated skills in pitching. It takes years to develop. It requires a combination of preparation, intelligence, and competitive experience that cannot be manufactured through any amount of talent alone. Ohtani adjusted twice in that appearance. Both times immediately. Both times effectively. Both times with the calm of someone who had already mapped out the alternative before the need for it arrived. The coaching staff watched and made notes that were significantly more detailed than anything a simple spring training appearance typically generates. If the adjustment was the detail that impressed the coaching staff most, the variety was the detail that silenced whatever remaining skepticism existed in the wider baseball conversation. Because one of the more persistent quiet concerns about Ohtani's return had been about the full arsenal. About whether all the weapons would be available. Whether every pitch in the collection that made him so uniquely difficult to face would come back online simultaneously, or whether the return would involve a managed, gradual reintroduction of options, starting with the basics and working outward. What Ohtani showed instead was the full picture. The fastball was there, as established. But so was everything that makes the fastball work, because a fastball without the pitches that set it up and the pitches that follow it is a significantly different proposition than a fastball inside a complete, varied, unpredictable sequence. The breaking ball was there. Moving with the conviction and the depth that hitters remember from the peak version of what Ohtani does. Not tentative. Not thrown as if the arm was being introduced to the pitch again after a long absence. Thrown with full intent and full confidence and full trust in the body to execute what the mind was asking for. The off-speed was there. Creating the timing disruption that compounds the difficulty of everything else in the sequence. Making the fastball faster by arriving slower. Making hitters commit to decisions they cannot afford to make in the early part of the sequence. And across the full variety, the sequencing. The order of pitches constructed not randomly but with the logic of someone who had studied the hitters he was facing, understood their tendencies, mapped the sequence that would create maximum difficulty at the moment it mattered most. One analyst watching from the stands said afterward, "That wasn't a spring training outing. That was a demonstration." In Japan, the first spring training pitching appearance of Shohei Ohtani is not a niche sports story covered by baseball specialists and ignored by the general public. It is national news. The coverage that surrounded his return to the mound reached into spaces that have nothing specifically to do with baseball, general news programs, morning shows, the kind of broad cultural conversation that in most countries would be reserved for elections or major national events. The anticipation had been building for months. The question of when and how and in what form pitcher Ohtani would return had occupied a significant portion of the Japanese baseball conversation for long enough that the answer, when it finally arrived, carried the weight of all that accumulated waiting. When the reports came through, scoreless, sharp, full arsenal, adjustments made confidently in real time, the reaction was not simply enthusiasm. It was relief. The kind of relief that expresses itself loudly, that floods social media and fills sports broadcasts and produces the particular noise of a nation collectively releasing a breath it had been holding for a very long time. Former players appeared on television to offer analysis that barely contained the emotion underneath it. Coaches who had worked with Ohtani at earlier stages of his career spoke about what they were seeing with the pride of people who had contributed, however distantly, to the foundation of something extraordinary. Fans who had followed his career from his earliest days in Nipponham through his entire American journey posted responses that went significantly beyond sports commentary. They were not simply happy about a spring training result. They were happy about a person. About the confirmation that the thing they loved, the full, two-way, unrestricted version of Shohei Ohtani, was back. What the Dodgers coaching staff said publicly after the appearance was carefully worded. Professional. Measured in the way that coaching staffs are trained to be measured when discussing individual player performances in spring training, where expectations are managed and nothing is declared settled or certain. But what they said privately, what filtered through to the reporters and analysts who cover this team closely enough to have access to the conversations that happen off the record, told a different story. The word that kept emerging was commitment. Not commitment in the abstract motivational sense. Commitment in the very specific sense of an organization that had watched what Ohtani did on that mound and made a collective internal decision: whatever he needs, whenever he needs it, in whatever form the support of this coaching staff and this organization can take, it will be there. The pledge to provide full support was not simply a public relations statement. It emerged from something real. From the experience of watching a player return from the kind of layoff that ends careers, or at minimum permanently alters them, and demonstrate in the very first outing that the standard he holds himself to has not changed by a single degree. Elite coaches respond to elite commitment. They recognize it because they have spent their careers around enough versions of it, and enough versions of its absence, to know immediately and instinctively when they are in the presence of the genuine article. What they saw in that spring training appearance was the genuine article. And the pledge that followed was the organization's way of saying, we see it. We recognize it. And we intend to honor it. Nothing Ohtani does on a baseball field arrives without architecture behind it. The scoreless outing, the adjustments, the full arsenal, the command, none of it was spontaneous. None of it was the product of talent simply expressing itself without construction. Every pitch that crossed the plate in that appearance had been prepared for. Every decision made in real time during the outing had a foundation of preparation underneath it that stretched back months. People who had access to his preparation process during the recovery period described an approach that was characteristic, which is to say, extraordinary. The physical rehabilitation was meticulous and precise, conducted with the same attention to detail that Ohtani brings to every aspect of his professional life. But the preparation was not only physical. He studied. While the arm recovered, the mind continued working. Analyzing opposing tendencies. Reviewing pitch sequences. Developing and refining the in-game decision-making frameworks that would allow him to pitch effectively not just when everything was working perfectly, but in the more realistic scenario where adjustments would be required in real time. This is the preparation philosophy that has defined him throughout his career. The conviction that physical talent is necessary but not sufficient. That what separates a great pitcher from a truly historic one is not the quality of the pitches when everything is going right, but the quality of the decisions when everything is uncertain. Spring training, for Ohtani, was not the beginning of that preparation. It was simply the first public demonstration of how far that preparation had already gone. There is one perspective on Ohtani's spring training return that has received less attention than it deserves. The hitters he faced. Spring training opponents are not anonymous. They are professional baseball players, people who have spent years developing the specific skills required to deal with high-level pitching. People who face a wide variety of arms across the course of a season and who have developed, through that accumulated experience, a reliable internal calibration for what they are dealing with at any given moment. What those hitters experienced facing Ohtani in that appearance was, by multiple accounts, immediately distinctive. Not simply because of the velocity. Not simply because of the movement. But because of the quality of uncertainty that his pitching creates, the particular cognitive difficulty of facing someone whose arsenal is varied enough and whose command is precise enough and whose sequencing is intelligent enough that the normal process of pattern recognition that experienced hitters rely on simply does not work the way it usually does. You cannot settle into a rhythm against him. You cannot find the comfortable space of knowing what is probably coming. Every pitch arrives as a genuine question. One player, speaking in general terms after the outing, described the experience as a reminder of why certain pitchers exist in a different category. Not better in degree from other good pitchers. Different in kind. The coaching staff heard this feedback and added it to everything else they had observed. The picture they were assembling was consistent. Ohtani was back. Fully. Completely. Without reservation. Spring training is not the season. The people who understand baseball know this. The coaching staff knows it. Ohtani himself knows it better than anyone. A scoreless spring training appearance, however sharp, however full of the qualities that matter most, is not a championship. Is not a record. Is not the thing itself. It is the beginning of the thing. And beginnings, when they arrive with this kind of clarity and this kind of quality and this kind of evidence that what is coming will be worth watching, beginnings matter. Japan went wild because it understood what it was watching. Not simply a pitcher returning from a layoff and performing competently in a low-stakes environment. But Shohei Ohtani, fully assembled, fully armed, fully committed, standing on a mound and telling the baseball world in the most direct language available to him that the wait is over. The coaching staff pledged full support because they watched that appearance and understood that what they are supporting is not simply an extraordinarily talented player. They are supporting something that arrives once in a generation, if that. Something that rewards every investment of attention and resource and care with returns that go beyond what any contract or projection or analytical model can fully capture. The whole nation is going wild. And if that spring training appearance is any indication of what is coming, they have every reason to be.